It's the landmark 1000th issue of Detective Comics, and some of the best writers and artists from across Batman's vast history have come together for this anthology. What'll happen next? Well, let's hop on in together and find out, shall we? So, as we join the comic, it's Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo who have the first story, and man, just what a warm feeling it is seeing these guys on Batman again. It's like coming home. They are probably this era's most defining Batman team after all, and we get the added caveat too of getting to see Capullo finally draw the original Batman costume. Ain't that a treat? Now, what exactly is the story here? Well, Batman is trying to get to the bottom of the longest mystery he's ever attempted to solve, one that actually began during one of his earliest adventures. You see, a murder at a museum had actually turned up a fake artifact that in turn made Batman go investigate some Japanese glassmakers, which in turn led him to some hacked computers, which in turn led him to an Egyptian tomb with an ancient cipher, and a recipe for the world's very first invisible ink. It's clear that someone somewhere has been leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for Batman to find, and no, for once it's not the Riddler or Hush or even Ra's al Ghul. This is someone else. Someone who seems to want to challenge Batman, not to hurt him, but to do so because they love mystery so deeply. After scouring the earth, eventually the long trail of clues leads Batman back to Gotham City to a strange apartment owned by a person with the initials PSI. As in Psi, as in X in the Greek alphabet, as in X marks the spot. It would seem that Batman's quest is finally over, but what answers lie ahead? It would seem that no actual villain put together this strange mystery. It was in fact the Guild of Detectives, made up of some of the greatest crime solvers in all of the DC universe, led by none other than Slam Bradley. Don't know who that is? Well, it's actually a Siegel and Schuster creation that predates even Superman. In fact, he is the original detective of Detective Comics. The Guild decided to put this mystery in front of Batman in hopes that by solving it he could pass the test and join their team. After all, he's finally old enough, he's about 80 real-world years old. And because he finally joined the team, he now has access to their amazing library filled with some of the greatest unsolved mysteries in the world. And for a second I thought this was going to be the backbone of this anthology, which each book would be a different story, but no, that doesn't really happen. We just get several stories after this. And no, I can't really cover each one. This is 96 pages right here, but the stories are ultimately short, so I'll go out of my way to highlight some of my favorites. We get a story from Kevin Smith of all people, wherein we see Bruce as Matches Malone goes to a black market seller to try and buy back the gun that killed his parents. It's actually a really effective little story. They work in a ton of different villains, a ton of different word gags, and it all ultimately leads to a really satisfying resolution with Alfred saying, "Isn't it a little macabre to keep the gun that kills your parents?" But Batman never had any intention to keep it. He wanted to melt it down, to reforge it, to quite literally turn it into a piece of armor to keep over his heart, making it so the weapon that scarred him so deeply as a child will now actually protect him as an adult on his crusade. Man, that's really nice, actually. Paul Dini has himself a little story here that feels suitably Batman the Animated Series. This story follows the worst henchman in all of Gotham and how he managed to accidentally bring down several criminals in the middle of their master plans. In fact, this guy is so comedically, so entirely incompetent, you would swear that he was doing all of this on purpose, and that is because, well, he absolutely is. He's not real at all. Different members of the Bat family put him on like a costume and use it to mess up villains' plots from the inside. Warren Ellis has a story in this collection, and it's probably the most straightforward of any of the stories. That's not to say it isn't really satisfying. Batman is a cool, tough badass who beats up people even though there's more of them and they're better armed than he is. Actually, it felt a lot like a Midnighter type story, actually, which is pretty interesting considering that that was Ellis's parody / deconstruction of Batman, and now he is here writing the real deal. Denny O'Neil, probably one of the most prolific Batman creators still kicking, gets a story too, focusing on Leslie Tompkins, but this one by far feels the shortest. He only gets about 4 pages, which is really unfair for a dude like O'Neil. Brian Michael Bendis gets in on the action, and of course he does. He tells a story of the Penguin of all people, a street-level foe who might actually be able to outlast all of Batman's other villains in a possible future. It's hard to place the canonicity of a lot of these stories, but this one definitely feels the most like an Elseworld story that Brian Michael Bendis has in his head and probably will pitch at some point. Probably the strangest artist-writer pairing for this anthology, though, is Kelly Jones and Jeff Johns. I'm really happy to see Kelly Jones's artwork get represented here in this big celebration of Batman. Just doesn't feel like these two's particular style mesh well together. That being said, this was a fun little story. For a second, I actually thought Jeff Johns was going to canonize the birthday boy from his Earth 1 Batman series. The main takeaway here is basically getting to see Batman in a happy family situation in the future where he's mostly got crime under wraps. And hey, speaking of happy families, I give Tom King a lot of grief for being utterly miserable in a lot of his Batman work, but guess what? He wrote a pretty fun one here. It's short, sweet, to the point, and mostly focused on the sidekicks. In fact, it almost feels like King wrote this story on a dare. Oh, you don't think I could write a happy, well-adjusted Batman? Well, screw you, I'll write the happiest, most well-adjusted Batman ever. And perhaps most importantly, we have the story from Peter Tomasi, the current writer of Detective Comics, the one that is supposed to lead us into his next arc featuring the Arkham Knight. Essentially, this story, which goes on last, is basically just the Arkham Knight reading his own manifesto against Batman. You know, who watches the Watchman? Who vigilantes the vigilante? Why are we all just okay with Batman brutalizing the mentally ill and stepping outside the bounds of the law? Someone should really step up to stop him. Maybe someone like me in a costume that looks a lot like his. And it's on that note that the comic comes to a close. So that was Detective Comics issue number 1000, everybody. And overall, it was a mixed bag, but mostly leaning more towards the pleasant side. There really wasn't anything bad in here, but there wasn't anything that knocked my socks off either. In fact, a lot of these stories in these 96 pages felt kinda short, with only Snyder and Smith actually getting what I felt a 3-act structure to work. Also, for such a big anniversary issue, I'm sure we could talk forever about all the creators that weren't included. Loeb, Morrison, Quitely all come to mind. Heck, as much as I don't like what the people have become in their real day-to-day life, Miller and Dixon probably should have been included here as well, if only for the amount they've actually done for Batman as a character. But, you know, I'm not gonna weep any tears over their lack of inclusion either. Ultimately, I would give this one an 8 out of 10. It was enjoyable. I don't think you're going to feel ripped off buying this one, but also if you twisted my arm, I dare say the Action Comics anniversary issue they did for 1,000 issues was actually a bit more satisfying. Hey there everyone, it's your old pal Cape Joel again, and I want to thank you so much for watching to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, why not check out some of these other videos I have available from the channel. Then you can follow me on Twitter and Facebook at Cape Joel, so you're always up to speed on when a brand new video drops. And hey, if you really like what I do, you might want to become a patron. Patrons get exclusive access to videos and content before anyone else, and they can do so for as little as $1 a month. Enjoy video and audio versions of the Comic Multiverse podcast and other videos before they drop here on YouTube. Heck, interact with me closer than ever before. You get all this when you become a patron. And with that, thank you so much again, everyone, and I will see you all again next time.